The clinking of crystal glasses echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling like tiny warning bells. Outside, the Texas summer heat still clung to the evening air, pressing against the tall windows of my parents' suburban mansion in Plano like it had something to prove. The cicadas hummed in the manicured backyard. The American flag near the pool moved lazily in the humid breeze. A rented jazz trio played Frank Sinatra beside the waterfall feature Dad had installed after his second promotion at the energy firm. Inside, 50 people waited for my father's 60th birthday toast. And I was about to learn exactly what my mother believed I owed them. I stood near the grand staircase, fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of sparkling water. My black dress felt tighter than it should have. Not because it didn't fit, it did, but because I could feel the weight of eyes. Family friends, church members, business associates, neighbors who'd watched me grow up. Every one of them believed the same story. That my parents built everything from nothing. That they sacrificed everything for me. That I was the ungrateful daughter who moved to the city and barely called. The truth was much uglier. My name is Ava Lycan. I'm 36 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas. I run my own logistics consulting firm, one I built from scratch after clawing my way through law school and corporate America without a dime of their help. But tonight wasn't about me. It was about my father, Richard Lycan, oil and gas executive, deacon at First Baptist, respected self-made man. And about my mother, Diane Lycan, queen of appearances, controller of narratives, destroyer of inconvenient truths. Dad tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The room quieted. All right, he said with a broad Texas grin. 60 years. I never thought I'd see it. Laughter. Someone shouted. You're just getting started, Rick. He lifted his glass. I've been blessed. Blessed with a beautiful wife, loyal friends, and a daughter who... He paused. Just long enough. My stomach tightened. Who taught me what perseverance looks like? Applause. That word again. Perseverance. Sounded noble. But in our family it was code. Perseverance meant, survive what we put you through and don't complain. Dad continued. Everything we did for Ava. Every long night. Every sacrifice. We gave her every opportunity. More applause. I felt my mother's hand slide around my waist. Her grip looked affectionate. It wasn't. He squeezed. Hard. And she knows, Mom said smoothly, stepping forward before Dad could finish, that she owes us everything. The words landed heavier than the Texas heat. Few guests chuckled. Someone said, "That's right." Mom smiled at them, that perfectly rehearsed Southern charm smile. Then she looked directly at me. Her eyes were cold. Ava didn't get where she is alone, she continued. We paid for her education. We supported her dreams. We made her who she is. The room turned toward me. Expectation. Gratitude. Submission. I felt the familiar burn rise in my chest, the same one I'd swallowed since childhood. But tonight I wasn't alone. Near the back of the room, standing beside the catering staff like he didn't belong there, was Daniel Reyes, my lawyer. And in his hand was a small black device. Mom lifted her glass. To family. To sacrifice. And to children who remember what they owe. Clink, clink, clink. Everyone drank. I didn't. Because tonight they were about to remember something too. 2 weeks earlier. Started with a phone call. I was in my Dallas office overlooking the skyline, Reunion Tower glowing in the late afternoon sun, when my phone buzzed. I let it ring once. 3 times. Then answered. Hi, Mom. Her voice was sugary sweet. Ava, sweetheart. We need to talk. Those words never meant anything good. She explained that Dad's company was restructuring. Investments had gone sideways. Some real estate deals weren't performing. Translation, they were in financial trouble. We just need a bridge, she said. A temporary loan. You've done so well for yourself. There it was. Asked. How much? Asked. $1 million. Actually laughed. I couldn't help it. $1 million isn't a bridge, Mom. It's a bailout. We paid for your college, she snapped, sweetness evaporating. We supported you when you moved to Austin. We gave you everything. The lie was so reflexive she probably believed it. You charged me rent at 16, I said quietly. You took the scholarship refund checks. You emptied Grandma's trust. Silence. Then the voice changed. Cold. Precise. You would be nothing without us, Ava. That was when I knew. This wasn't about money. It was about control. And if I didn't handle this carefully, they'd rewrite history again, this time in front of an audience. Back to the party. Mom stepped aside so Dad could continue speaking. He wiped his eyes theatrically. Ava, honey, why don't you say a few words? Trap. Public gratitude. Public submission. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. My heels clicked against marble. The jazz trio softened into silence. I took the microphone. I love my dad, I began. That part was true. Complicated but true. He worked hard. He taught me discipline. Dad nodded proudly. But there's something I've learned at 36. The air shifted. You can be grateful for someone's role in your life, without owing them your future. Murmurs. Mom's fingers tightened around her glass. I am proud of what I built, I continued. But I built it. I worked 3 jobs in college. I graduated with loans. I paid back every dollar of that support. Mom laughed lightly. Oh, Ava. Don't embarrass yourself. Embarrass myself. The same word she used when I cried after she sold my car to teach me responsibility. I looked toward the back of the room. Daniel met my eyes. I gave the smallest nod. Mom stepped forward, voice rising. We have receipts, Ava. We have bank records. Don't twist reality. I agree, I said calmly. Let's talk about records. Daniel walked forward. Guest turned. Who is this? Someone whispered. Mom's smile faltered. Excuse me. This is Daniel Reyes, I said. My attorney. The word attorney hit like a gunshot. Dad's face went pale. Oh, Ava, Mom said softly, dangerously. Don't be dramatic. Daniel placed the small device on the table near the cake. I wouldn't, he said evenly. Mom's eyes locked onto the device. Recognition flickered. And for the first time in my life, saw fear. I picked up the microphone again. You're right, Mom. Records matter. Daniel pressed play. The room filled with my mother's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. If she doesn't give us the money, we'll remind her what happened in Austin. She won't want that out. The guests froze. Dad whispered. Diane. The recording continued. She owes us. After everything we covered up for her. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I'd pass out. Mom lunged toward the device. Turn that off. But it was too late. Because the next words changed everything. And as her voice echoed through the silent Texas mansion, I watched her mask finally crack. The recording didn't stop. Got worse. My mother's voice, steady, calculating, unmistakably hers, filled the marble echo of that Texas living room like a courtroom confession. If she doesn't give us the money, we'll remind her what happened in Austin. She won't want that out. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Austin. 10 years ago. The part of my life my parents had carefully reshaped into something convenient. Dad's voice came next on the recording, lower, uncertain. Diane. That was a misunderstanding. My mother's reply was ice. It was leverage. The jazz trio stood frozen. The bartender stopped pouring mid-glass. Someone's fork clinked loudly against a plate in the silence. My chest tightened, but not from fear. From release. Because for years I thought I imagined it. The manipulation. The rewriting. The threats disguised as concern. Daniel's hand rested calmly near the device, ready if she tried to grab it again. Mom's face had lost all color. You recorded me, she hissed at me. No, I said evenly. You recorded yourself. 3 months earlier. I never meant to trap my mother. I meant to protect myself. When she first started pressing me for money, I ignored it. Then she escalated. Calls turned into voice messages. Voice messages turned into veiled threats. "You don't want people asking questions about your time in Austin," she'd said casually one afternoon. My blood had gone cold. Because Austin wasn't a scandal. It was survival. I was 26, fresh out of law school, working at a mid-size firm downtown near Congress Avenue. I rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a broken AC unit that barely survived Texas summers. I was dating someone back then. His name was Mark Delaney. Charming, charismatic, from a wealthy Houston family. He drove a Porsche and called my independence cute. I didn't realize I was in danger until I tried to leave. The night everything exploded. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. I reported him. His family made it disappear. My mother told me to drop it. "Do you understand what kind of people they are?" she'd snapped. "You don't ruin families like that." I moved to Dallas a month later. And somehow, over time the story shifted. From assault, to a messy breakup, to Ava made poor choices, to silence. But I had proof. Because when my mother called 3 months ago and started circling Austin like a shark, I recorded the conversation. Texas is a one-party consent state. She never knew. Back to the party. Dad stepped toward me, voice shaking. "Ava, what is this?" "It's the truth," I replied. Mom straightened her spine, trying to reclaim control. "This is taken out of context." Daniel finally spoke. His tone was calm, professional. "We have the full recording, Mrs. Lycan, including the portion where you reference pressuring your daughter to withdraw a police statement." A collective inhale swept the room. Dad looked like he'd been punched. "You told me that was handled," he whispered to her. "It was," she snapped. "For the family. For the family," I repeated. "Or for appearances." Mom turned on me fully now, Southern charm gone. "You ungrateful child. We protected you." "You protected his family," I shot back. "Because they had more money than we did." That hit. 'Cause it was true. And everyone in that room knew how much image mattered in our community. First Baptist Deacon Richard Lycan. Charity Board member Diane Lycan. Perfect family. Perfect daughter. Perfect narrative. Except perfection cracks under pressure. And tonight I was done holding it together. The guests begin to shift. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire in dry Texas brush. "Is this about that Delaney boy? I remember something. She left Austin suddenly." Dad looked between us, realization dawning too slowly. "You told me she overreacted," he said to Mom. "You said there was no proof." "There wasn't," Mom snapped. Daniel calmly pulled a folder from his briefcase. "There was," he said. "Hospital photos. Filed report. Witness statements." Mom's composure finally fractured. She knocked over her wine glass. Red liquid spilled across the white linen like blood. "You planned this," she accused me. "You waited for your father's birthday." "No," I said quietly. "You picked the stage." Silence again. Heavy. Unavoidable. Dad sank into a chair. "I asked you for one thing," Mom continued, voice trembling now. "One loan. After everything. $1 million, I corrected. "In exchange for silence." Gasps again. Dad looked up sharply. "Silence." Mom's eyes darted. "Wrong move." Daniel pressed play again. Her voice. "If she gives us the money, we bury Austin permanently." The room erupted. Someone swore. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." Dad stood abruptly. "Diane, tell me this isn't real." For the first time in my life, my mother had no script. No smile. No angle. She looked at me like I had betrayed her. Which, in her mind, I had. Because control was her currency. And I had just burned the bank down. But the twist wasn't over. I stepped closer to my father. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," I said softly. "I came here to end it." "End what?" he asked hollowly. The leverage. Daniel cleared his throat. There's more. Mom's head snapped toward him. No. Yes, he said calmly. He pulled out another document. A civil complaint. The words sucked the oxygen from the room. Dad stared at me. You're suing us. I'm suing her, I corrected gently. For financial coercion. And for the trust fund she liquidated without authorization when Grandma passed. Murmurs intensified. Grandma Elise had left me a modest trust. I never saw a dollar. Mom always said the market collapsed. It hadn't. Daniel laid out printed statements. Transfers. Signatures. All leading back to Diane Lycan. Dad looked like he might faint. You said the trust was gone, he whispered. Mom's voice came out brittle. It was used for family expenses. For your real estate speculation, Daniel said. The room felt smaller. Utter. Like the walls were closing in. I watched my father's world crumble in real time. And I hated that part. Because despite everything I loved him. But love without truth is just dependency. And I was done being dependent. The final blow of the night. Mom straightened one last time. You think this makes you powerful? She asked me. You think this changes what people think? I looked around the room. At the guests avoiding eye contact. At the church friends whispering. At the business partners calculating reputational damage. It already has, I said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You'll regret this. There it was. The threat. Familiar. Predictable. I met her gaze steadily. No, I said. You will. Because what she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the Delaney family had just re-entered Texas. And this time, I wasn't the 26-year-old girl they silenced. I was prepared. As Dad sank back into his chair and guests began quietly leaving the mansion, my phone vibrated in my hand. Unknown number. Houston area code. I stared at it. And slowly answered. A smooth male voice said, Ms. Lycan, we need to discuss what you've started. The line went dead. I looked up at Daniel. And for the first time that night, I felt something worse than anger. The Texas night felt different after that call. Heavier. Charged. Like the air before a Gulf Coast thunderstorm. Guests were still filtering out of my parents' mansion in Plano. Heels clicking fast across the driveway. Luxury SUVs starting in uncomfortable silence. The string lights over the backyard pool flickered softly, still glowing like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Inside, the house no longer looked like a celebration. It looked like a crime scene after the tape goes up. My father sat in a leather armchair near the fireplace, shoulders slumped, staring at nothing. The towering birthday cake, white buttercream with gold trim, leaned slightly to one side where someone had bumped the table during the chaos. 60 candles still unlit. My mother stood near the kitchen island, arms folded, spine rigid. She hadn't cried. Not once. That was never her style. Crying meant weakness. Control was her oxygen. Daniel stepped beside me, voice low. Houston number. He nodded. Delaney, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. 15 minutes earlier. When I stepped outside to take that call, the humid Texas air wrapped around me like a wet blanket. The cicadas screamed from the trees. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Ms. Lycan, the man's voice had said smoothly. You've escalated something that was handled years ago. Handled, I repeated. That's what you call witness intimidation. Soft chuckle. Be careful with your words. Or what? Silence. You don't want old headlines resurfacing. Court records. Cross-examinations. Your business is thriving, isn't it? There it was. The American version of power. Not fist. Not shouting. Reputation. They'd bury me in legal warfare and media spin if I stepped too far. I'm not 26 anymore, I said evenly. No, he agreed. You're not. Blick. Line dead. Back in the living room. Dad finally looked up at me. Is this about that boy from Houston? He asked, voice thin. That man, I corrected. Yes. My mother rolled her eyes. This again. Don't, I said sharply. The word cut the air. For the first time in my life, she flinched at my tone. Daniel stepped forward, measured and composed. Mr. Lycan, with all due respect, the Delaney family is concerned about potential civil exposure if this recording becomes public. Dad blinked. Public? I haven't released anything, I said. Yet. Mom laughed, brittle. So this is blackmail now? No, I replied calmly. This is protection. She walked toward me slowly, heels clicking like a metronome. You're destroying your father, she whispered. Do you see him? Look at him. I did. And my chest tightened. 'Cause she wasn't wrong. He looked shattered. But not because of me. Because the illusion cracked. And he had built his entire identity around that illusion. Flashback, the truth about Dad. People think betrayal is loud. It's not. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a father choosing comfort over confrontation. When I reported Mark Delaney, I expected rage from my father. I expected him to drive to Houston. To threaten. To protect. Instead, he sat at our dining table in Plano, staring at the police paperwork. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly. Then my mother spoke. Richard, think about this. The Delaneys donate to half the charities you sit on. Their firm is tied to your board. He didn't answer. He just rubbed his temples. And that was the moment I learned something devastating. My father loved me. But he loved stability more. Back to present. Dad stood abruptly. Enough, he said hoarsely. Everyone leave. Most guests already had. The house emptied quickly until it was just the four of us. Daniel. Me. The jazz trio quietly packed their instruments and slipped out. The silence afterward was suffocating. Dad walked toward my mother. Did you take the trust? She didn't answer. Diane. Her jaw tightened. It was invested. In your name, Daniel said calmly. Dad looked at her like he didn't recognize her. How much? He asked. She hesitated. 380,000. The number landed like a physical blow. Dad staggered back slightly. That was her grandmother's money. It was sitting there. Mom snapped. And we needed capital for the properties in Frisco. And you never told me. She didn't respond. Because silence was answer enough. Then everything shifted. My phone buzzed again. This time a text. Unknown number. A photo attachment. My stomach dropped when I opened it. It was me. Leaving my Austin apartment 10 years ago. Crying. Face bruised. Taken from across the street. Someone had been watching. Below the image, one line. Let sleeping dogs lie. I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel saw it instantly. What? I handed him the phone. His jaw tightened. That's intimidation. Mom leaned forward trying to see. What is it? I pulled the phone back. You wanted Austin buried. I said quietly. Well, it's not buried. Dad's hands began to shake. They're threatening you. I met his eyes. Yes. And for the first time that night, I saw something I hadn't seen in 10 years. Anger. Real anger. Not at me. Them. Himself. Dad's breaking point. He turned slowly toward my mother. You told me it was exaggerated. It was messy. He hurt her. Silence. Diane. She looked cornered now. I handled it. That's not what I asked. She didn't respond. Dad's voice cracked. Did he hurt our daughter? The question echoed through the cavernous living room. And after 10 years, my mother finally whispered. Yes. The word shattered something permanent. Dad staggered back into the couch like someone had physically pushed him. You told me she was dramatic, he said weakly. I told you what kept us stable. Stable. That word again. Stability over justice. Image over truth. Dad looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the weight of regret hit him like a freight train. "I failed you," he whispered. The words I'd waited a decade to hear. But they didn't bring relief. They brought war. Because if the Delaney's were sending surveillance photos, they were nervous. And nervous, powerful people are dangerous. Daniel stepped in. "We need to move quickly," he said firmly. "If they're escalating, we file first." "File what?" Ed asked. "A civil suit against Mark Delaney for assault and coercion. And against the family for witness intimidation." Mom looked horrified. "Are you insane? That will destroy us." Daniel's voice was cold. "No, Mrs. Lycan. The recording already did." Dad looked between us. Then he did something unexpected. He walked over to me and placed his hand on my shoulder. "What do you need?" he asked. "Not what's best for the family. Not what will people say. What do you need?" The shift was seismic. I swallowed hard. "I need you not to protect them," I said. "Even if it costs you." He nodded slowly. "I won't." Mom stared at him like he'd betrayed her. And maybe in her mind he had. But the night wasn't over. Because while we stood there in that fractured mansion, red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. "Please." All of us froze. Daniel frowned. "I didn't call them." Dad walked toward the door slowly. 2 Plano police officers stood on the porch. "Mr. Lycan?" one asked. "Yes. We received a report of blackmail and extortion occurring at this address." Every eye in the room turned to my mother. She looked stunned. "I didn't call." But the officer continued. "The complainant alleges that a recording was used to threaten financial demands." My stomach dropped. The Delaneys moved fast. Very fast. Daniel stepped forward smoothly. "Officers, I'm counsel for Ms. Lycan. We'd be happy to clarify." The officer's gaze shifted to me. "Ma'am, are you demanding money from your parents?" My heart pounded. This was how they worked. Flip the narrative. Make the victim the aggressor. Mom's lips slowly curved upward. Not relief. Opportunity. I realized something chilling in that moment. This wasn't just about Austin anymore. This was about control of the entire story. And someone had just fired the first public shot. The officer looked at me again. "Ma'am." Took a breath. And said, "No, officer. But I think someone powerful is very afraid." The flashing lights painted the walls red and blue as the Texas night swallowed the rest of the truth. And somewhere in Houston, the Delaney family was watching. The red and blue lights bled across the marble floors like a warning. Texas heat still hung thick outside, but inside my parents' mansion, the air had turned cold. 2 Plano police officers stood just past the threshold. Their presence wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate, controlled, professional, the kind of calm that means paperwork is already moving somewhere behind the scenes. My mother was the first to recover. She straightened her pearl necklace, smoothing her expression back into something polite and wounded. "Officers," she said gently, "this is a misunderstanding." Course it was. It always was. Daniel stepped forward smoothly. "If there's an allegation of extortion, we'd like to know who filed it." The older officer glanced at his tablet. Anonymous corporate counsel representing a Houston-based family. There it was. Not even hiding it. The Delaneys. They hadn't wasted a second. I felt my pulse steady instead of spike. But if they were filing first, they were scared. And scared powerful people make mistakes. "Are you requesting money from your parents in exchange for silence?" the younger officer asked me directly. "No," I said clearly. "My parents requested money from me." Dad inhaled sharply beside me. The officer's eyes flicked toward him. "That true, sir?" Dad looked like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. For 60 years, he'd chosen stability. Tonight he chose something else. "Yes," he said quietly. "We asked her for a loan." Mom turned toward him, stunned. "Richard. And my wife may have referenced private matters inappropriately," he continued, voice gaining strength. My mother's composure cracked. You're taking her side. The older officer raised a hand. Ma'am, no one's taking sides. We're just determining if a crime occurred. Daniel interjected calmly. There was no demand made. In fact, the recording demonstrates attempted coercion against my client. The officer nodded slowly. If that's the case, Ms. Lycan, you may want to file a formal complaint. I met his eyes. I intend to. Mom's face drained of color. The officers took basic statements and left without arrests. But the damage was done. Neighbors had seen the patrol car. Phones were already buzzing. In a wealthy Plano subdivision, police lights at a deacon's birthday party travel faster than wildfire. When the door finally shut and silence returned, it felt different. Not explosive. Reckoning. Dad sank into a chair again, but this time he wasn't broken. He was thinking. Mom stood rigid near the fireplace, staring at me like I'd detonated something sacred. You've made a terrible mistake, she said quietly. No, I replied. You did. 10 years ago. Daniel gathered his briefcase. We need to move fast. If they've escalated to police complaints, they'll escalate publicly next. How? Ed asked. Media leaks, reputation attacks, financial audits. Anything to discredit Ava before she files. Mom laughed bitterly. You think they care that much? Daniel's gaze was steady. They wouldn't have sent surveillance photos if they didn't. Dad's head snapped toward me. Photos? I hesitated, then handed him my phone. He stared at the image of me, bruised, crying, unaware I was being watched. His hands began shaking again. They followed you. Yes. For how long? I don't know. The room felt smaller. For the first time, this wasn't about embarrassment or money. It was about something darker. Power maintained through fear. I drove back to my downtown Dallas condo before sunrise. The skyline glowed pink against the humid horizon. Traffic along I-75 was already building. Early commuters, delivery trucks, radio hosts arguing about politics and the Cowboys. Normal Texas life. Meanwhile, my world had detonated. I showered, dressed in a Navy power suit, and went straight to my office overlooking Victory Park. By 9 a.m., 3 things had happened. My firm's social media pages were flooded with anonymous comments. A local business blog posted a vague article about legal turmoil surrounding Dallas consultant. My biggest client emailed asking for reassurance. They were moving exactly how Daniel predicted. Clean, strategic, relentless. By noon, Daniel sat across from me in my glass-walled conference room. Here's what they're doing, he said. They're trying to bait you into reacting emotionally. They already called the police. Yes, that's step 1. Paint you as unstable or vindictive. I leaned back in my chair. So what's step 2? Dig into your company. See if there's any weakness. Tax filings. Employee disputes. Anything. They won't find anything. I know. But they don't need something real. They need something loud. I stared out at the Dallas skyline. What's our move? He slid a folder across the table. We file first. Inside was a draft civil complaint. Assault. Intimidation. Witness tampering. Emotional damages. Mark Delaney's name printed clearly at the top. Seeing it in black ink made my chest tighten. 10 years. 10 years of silence. Once we file, Daniel said, it becomes public record. They can't bury it again. And my parents. Your father may be subpoenaed. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the cost. Truth always charges interest. File it, I said. What I didn't know yet was that my mother wasn't sitting quietly in shame. She was mobilizing. That afternoon, she met privately with 2 members of our church board. By evening, a carefully worded statement was circulating. False allegations rooted in personal vendettas. She was rebuilding her narrative. Yes, because if there's one thing Diane Lycan understood, it was social survival. At 4:17 p.m. my phone rang again. Private number. I let it go to voicemail. A different voice this time. Older. Measured. Ava. This is Charles Delaney. Mark's father. Oil money. Political connections. University endowments. I believe you've mistaken youthful conflict for criminality, he continued smoothly. Dragging this into court will not end the way you hope. I didn't respond. He added one final sentence. You may want to speak with your father about his company's pending acquisition. The line went dead. My stomach dropped. Pending acquisition. I immediately called Dad. He answered on the second ring. Ava. What acquisition? Silence. How do you know about that? My pulse quickened. Because Charles Delaney just referenced it. Dad exhaled shakily. There's a merger in progress. If this lawsuit goes public, it could collapse. And there it was. The leverage had shifted. It wasn't just reputation now. It was millions. Careers. Retirements. My father's legacy. I won't ask you to stop, Dad said quietly. But I could hear it. The fear. The cost calculation. For the first time. The battlefield wasn't just emotional. It was financial. Corporate. Public. Exactly where the Delaneys were strongest. I stood on my balcony overlooking Dallas. Warm wind. Distant sirens. City lights blinking endlessly. I thought about 26-year-old me. Crying. Tired. Alone. No one powerful on my side. Now I had resources. Now I had proof. Now I had a father slowly waking up. But I also had enemies with deeper pockets and fewer morals. My phone buzzed again. Text from Daniel. They just filed a countersuit. Attachment. Defamation. Business interference. Extortion. They were going nuclear. And at the bottom of the filing. A name I didn't expect. Co-defendant, Richard Lycan. They weren't just coming for me. They were coming for my father too. I stared at the screen. Heart steady. Breathing controlled. Because they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They thought fear would break me. But fear was something I survived 10 years ago. Now, I had nothing left to lose. And everything to expose. Picked up my phone and called Daniel. Add something to the complaint, I said calmly. What? Civil conspiracy. There was a pause. That will drag everyone into it. Yes, I said. That's the point. Outside, thunder rolled across the Texas sky. Storm was coming. And this time, I wasn't running from it. The storm hit Dallas just after midnight. Lightning split the sky over Victory Park, illuminating the glass towers in violent flashes of white. Thunder rolled across the city like distant artillery. Rain lashed against my balcony doors, turning the skyline into a blur of neon and water. Inside, I stood barefoot on cold hardwood floors, staring at the countersuit again. Delaney v. Hahn. Defamation. Business interference. Extortion. And beneath my name, Richard Hahn. They hadn't just escalated. They'd declared war. By sunrise it was everywhere. A Houston business journal ran the headline. Energy executive tied to daughter's explosive legal battle. Local Dallas media picked it up within hours. Church groups were texting. Board members were calling. Investors were asking questions. The acquisition Dad mentioned paused before noon. I watched the markets tick across CNBC from my office TV. Even though his company wasn't publicly traded, the merger partner was. And they didn't like uncertainty. My phone buzzed. Answered immediately. They froze it, he said without greeting. I'm sorry, I replied. I'm not calling to guilt you. Silence. Then, I should have handled this 10 years ago. The words didn't fix anything. But they mattered. Daniel had warned me. Once we added civil conspiracy, discovery would open doors. Emails, internal memos, private communications. And powerful families hate discovery. Because discovery doesn't care about reputation. Cares about receipts. By noon, Daniel called with something unexpected. You're not their only problem. What do you mean? There are 2 sealed complaints from former employees tied to the Delaney Foundation. My breath caught. For what? Harassment. Financial coercion. Pattern. Patterns are lethal in court. Were they buried? Yes. Yes. Settled privately. NDAs. Course. Money doesn't just buy silence. It manufactures it. At 3:12 p.m., a news alert flashed across my phone. Austin woman files statement supporting lichen allegations. Opened it. A name I hadn't heard in years. Rachel Kim. She had been my neighbor in Austin. The night Mark grabbed me, she heard the shouting. She saw him shove me into the hallway. She had offered to testify back then. My mother told me not to drag outsiders into family matters. Now Rachel had spoken publicly. And that changed everything. Because this wasn't my word alone anymore. That evening, I drove back to my parents' house. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and metallic. Wet pavement reflected streetlights in long golden streaks. The American flag near the mailbox hung heavy and soaked. Dad opened the door before I knocked. He looked older. Not weak, just worn. Mom was in the living room, TV muted, news ticker running our names across the bottom of the screen. She didn't stand when I entered. Congratulations, she said coldly. You've made us national gossip. I ignored her and looked at Dad. Did you know about the countersuit before it was filed? He hesitated. That's a yes, I said quietly. He swallowed. Their attorneys contacted me yesterday morning. They said if I publicly distanced myself from your claims, they'd reconsider including me. My chest tightened. And he met my eyes. I refused. Mom shot up from her seat. You refused, she snapped. Richard, this is your retirement. Your reputation. He turned to her slowly. I chose reputation 10 years ago. The silence that followed was seismic. Because that sentence wasn't just about Austin. It was about their entire marriage. I protected this family. Mom shouted. You protected control, Dad replied. Her eyes widened like she'd been slapped. I built our social standing. At what cost, he asked. She gestured toward me. Her dramatics. Her bruises were not dramatics. The room felt like it was splitting open. And I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just my reckoning. It was theirs. Decades of carefully arranged power dynamics collapsing in real time. Daniel called while I was still there. I need you somewhere private, he said. I stepped outside onto the covered patio. What is it? We traced the trust transfer. My pulse quickened. And it didn't just go into a real estate investment. It funded a legal retainer. For who? For the Delaney family. 10 years ago. The world tilted. You're saying? Yes, Daniel said carefully. Your grandmother's trust helped pay the attorneys who pressured you to drop the assault claim. The air left my lungs. Not just silence. Not just manipulation. Financing my own suppression. I felt something inside me harden permanently. I walked back into the house slowly. Mom looked up. What now? She asked bitterly. I held her gaze. You used Grandma's money to pay their lawyers. Her face went pale. Dad turned sharply. Diane. It was an investment in stability, she cried. If this went public, it would have ruined everything. You mean it would have ruined appearances, I said. She laughed hysterically. You think truth fixes anything. Truth destroys. No, I replied evenly. Lies do. Dad stepped back like he'd finally seen the full architecture of her decisions. And I saw something else in his expression. Not just anger. Grief. Because he was realizing he'd spent decades married to someone who valued power over protection. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. It's happening, he said. What is? The second former employee just broke her NDA. Felt the shift. When one person speaks, it's risky. When 3 speak, it's momentum. Media outlets are digging, Daniel continued. They're not controlling this narrative anymore. I looked at my mother. For the first time since this began, she looked afraid. Not of embarrassment, not of gossip, but of losing control completely. "You can still stop this," she said suddenly. I almost laughed. "By what?" "Dropping the case." "Yes. We settle quietly. We restore peace." The word sounded almost absurd. "There was never peace," I said softly. "There was silence." Dad walked toward me. "If you go forward," he said, voice steady, "they will try to destroy you." "I know. They'll try to destroy me." "I know." He nodded once. "Then let them try." Mom stared at him like he was a stranger. And in that moment, their marriage ended. Not legally, but spiritually. That night, as I drove back to Dallas, Daniel called one last time. "There's something else." I braced myself. "What now?" "We subpoenaed phone records from 2016. "Why 2016? "That's when Mark Delaney ran for city council." I frowned. "And there were multiple calls between your mother and his campaign manager." The road blurred in front of me. "Why would she?" Daniel's voice lowered. "Because if your assault allegation resurfaced during his campaign, it would have killed it." I pulled the car to the side of the road. Rainwater still pooled along the curb. "You're saying my mother wasn't just silencing scandal?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "She was protecting his political future." The truth settled like ice in my veins. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about reputation. This was about power networks, oil money, church influence, politics. And my mother had chosen her position inside that network over her daughter. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "File everything," I said. "We already have." Lightning flickered again in the distance. Trial dates were being set. Depositions scheduled. Media circling. And for the first time, the Delaneys weren't dictating the pace. We were. But as I pulled back onto the highway, headlights flashing past in the Texas night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Because powerful men rarely fall quietly, and desperate people make dangerous moves. I had exposed the structure. Now I was about to see how far it would go to protect itself. The trial began on a Monday morning in downtown Dallas. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, the kind that makes the glass towers look colder than they are. News vans lined the street outside the federal courthouse. Camera crews adjusted tripods. Reporters rehearsed live intros with perfectly serious expressions. Texas loves power stories, especially when powerful families start bleeding. I stepped out of Daniel's car wearing a charcoal suit and low heels. No dramatic sunglasses. No attempt to hide. If this was going to be public, I would be fully visible. Microphones lifted immediately. "Ms. Lycan, do you regret filing? Is this about money? Did your parents try to silence you?" I stopped walking. Daniel gave me a look that said, "You don't have to." But I did. "This has never been about money," I said calmly. "It's about accountability." And then I walked inside. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and paper. Cool air. Quiet tension. American flags on either side of the judge's bench. On the left side sat Mark Delaney and his legal team. He looked older, more polished. But I recognized the same controlled smirk from 10 years ago, the one he wore when he thought I wouldn't fight back. Behind him sat his father, Charles Delaney. Stone-faced. Political donors in tailored suits filled 2 rows behind them. On my side, Daniel, Rachel, 2 former Delaney Foundation employees. And my father, alone. My mother was not there. Opening statements were strategic warfare. The Delaney's lead attorney painted me as a disgruntled former girlfriend who waited until Mark's political aspirations resurfaced to weaponize an old misunderstanding. Classic. Clean. Predictable. Then Daniel stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid out a pattern. Assault. Witness intimidation. Financial coercion. Suppression funded in part by my grandmother's trust. Connections between my mother and Mark's campaign. The courtroom shifted. Because patterns are harder to dismiss than accusations. Then came the moment I had waited 10 years for. I took the stand. My palms were steady. My voice was not shaking. I described Austin. The apartment hallway. Rachel's knock on the door. The hospital visit. The pressure to withdraw the report. Mark's attorney tried to rattle me. You continued dating Mr. Delaney for weeks after this alleged assault? Yes, I said calmly. Because that's how abusive dynamics often work. Silence. You never pursued criminal charges. Because my family and his legal team applied sustained pressure. Do you have proof of that? Daniel pressed a button. The recording played. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. If she doesn't give us the money, we'll remind her what happened in Austin. No one spoke. No one moved. The judge's expression hardened slightly. Then Rachel testified. Clear. Direct. Unemotional. She described the shove. The bruise. My panic. Then the former foundation employees testified. Similar patterns. Similar silencing tactics. Similar NDAs. The architecture of power was no longer theoretical. It was documented. But the real earthquake came on day 4. Daniel called my father to the stand. I hadn't known he would. Dad looked smaller under oath. Older. But his voice carried. Mr. Lycan, Daniel began. Did you know your wife used your daughter's trust fund to retain attorneys connected to the Delaney family? Dad swallowed. No. When did you find out? The night of my birthday party. And how did that make you feel? The courtroom stilled. Like I failed my daughter. The Delaney's attorney objected. Overruled. Dad continued. I chose stability over confrontation 10 years ago. That was a mistake. You could feel the shift. Because this wasn't just legal anymore. It was moral. Then came the final twist. Phone records from 2016 were entered into evidence. Calls between my mother and Mark's campaign manager. Multiple calls. Strategic timing. The implication was clear. Silence wasn't just about family image. It was about political advancement. The courtroom buzzed. Mark's composure cracked for the first time. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering sharply. The judge called for order. And in that moment, the power dynamic flipped. Outside the courthouse, public opinion shifted rapidly. News cycles turned aggressive. Headlines changed tone. Pattern of suppression alleged. Campaign connections surface. Energy executive testifies against silence. Sponsors distance themselves from Mark's upcoming state senate announcement. Board members resigned quietly from the Delaney Foundation. The machine began to fracture. The verdict didn't come dramatically. Came clinically. The jury found Mark Delaney liable for assault and emotional damages. They found evidence of coordinated intimidation efforts. They did not find me liable for defamation. The countersuit collapsed. There were appeals to be filed, of course. There always are. But the narrative was no longer theirs to control. When the judge finished reading the decision, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. 10 years of breath leaving my lungs. 3 weeks later, my father came to my Dallas condo alone. No lawyers. No cameras. He looked lighter. Not happy. But honest. I filed for divorce, he said quietly. I absorbed that. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he added. I'm asking for a chance to show up differently. That was new. Showing up. Not controlling. Not calculating. Just present. We'll see, I said. It wasn't rejection. It was boundary. And he nodded like he understood. As for my mother, she never called. Through attorneys, she attempted a private settlement regarding the trust. It declined. The court ordered restitution. Financially, she would recover. Socially, she would adjust. Control, however, was gone. And that was the part she never learned to live without. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in Austin. Not a courtroom. Conference. Topic: corporate power and silence. The room was full. Survivors, lawyers, students, executives. I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as a strategist. Because that's what this became. Not revenge for pain, but exposure of systems. During the Q&A, a young woman asked me, "Weren't you scared?" I smiled slightly. "Yes." "What changed?" I thought about that carefully, then answered, "I realized fear was the tool they used. And I was the one holding it. Silence isn't peace. Stability without truth is control. And family loyalty that demands self-erasure isn't love." As I walked off that stage, Texas sunlight flooded through the glass atrium. Warm, bright, unapologetic. 10 years ago, I left Austin bruised and quiet. Now I stood there visible and unafraid. Not because powerful people stopped fighting, but because I stopped surrendering. And that changed everything.